At the beginning of my journey, I started watching a lot of videos. But I have to say, there is no shortcut because you have to build your muscle memory. Even with the best advice in the world, you have to practice. For context, I have started shooting very late in life at age 35, and I'm based in the UK, which comes with a lot of restrictions, but I am still able to fire at my local gun range. I'm able to take part in competitions, and recently I finished my first full season of CSR, that's the UK equivalent of a high power rifle in the US. So it's been a very steep learning curve, but I've been able to figure out, and I wanted to share for anyone who, like me, is starting from scratch and doesn't know what to expect, what are the main things I had to work on when it comes to handling firearms, especially in a competition setting. When it comes to be accurate and consistent with a given firearm, there is the stance you have to adopt. Then there is the grip. It's about finding the right contact points with your body. Also, how good is my recoil management? The way I did it is first by starting dry firing. I'm in the UK, I don't own any firearms, so the way I did it is I bought airsoft replicas of the firearms I'm using for competitions. So it's not technically dry firing, but this is the closest I can get to here in the UK. And still, because you can get them to be completely made of metal and have a weight which is very similar to the weight of the firearms you handle in your club or your competitions. One thing I do as well is, for example, with my handgun, I have a laser aiming device, and that's able to tell me how much my aiming is deviating or wobbling, and I can see the effects of when I change my grip or my trigger technique, how much it affects the actual aim. But of course, airsoft replicas have their own limitations, and it doesn't necessarily tell you how good is going to be your aim and your grip, your stance, your trigger control with a real firearm. So because my access to the range is very limited, my philosophy was every bullet has a purpose. Every single bullet has a mission. Let's say, for example, I want to try something, experiment with something as simple as my finger position on the trigger. So the key is to be very methodical. I would tell myself, I am using 5 rounds, and with me pressing only with the tip of the finger touching the trigger. And then I compare with another target on which I would shoot similarly 5 rounds with more of my finger on the trigger. And that allows me to figure out which technique works best for me. So I use videos and online advice as a guidance. I just consult many different perspectives because, again, when it comes to gun YouTubers or just average gun users on the internet, everyone has their different perspectives, everyone has their different techniques. So I just try to use the internet to map out what are the different practices. But again, these are all just for a tool for consultation, because ultimately I'll have to figure out what works for me. And I use then range time to pinpoint exactly which technique is the best. So a lot is trial and error, and the same for your firearms. Although it's not a hobby as expensive as, let's say, cars or driving on track, still it is a noticeable investment for your bank account. And that's why, as a general advice, I would say to keep your purchase decisions to the very, very last moment, after you've exhausted all different options, which are, for example, borrowing firearms from friends or from your club, and trying what works for you. What do you feel comfortable shooting with? What do you enjoy the most? Which feels the most comfortable, the most challenging? And I'm thinking it's actually maybe a good thing that I've been able to take part in one full season of competition with rented firearms instead of, me having to buy mine, because it would have been a lot of money spent and money lost when I had to maybe sell some accessories I realized I don't need in the end. And one thing I've realized is that even shooting with gear, equipment that is not top-notch quality, it actually does me a really great favor, because when you shoot with a rifle or ammunition which is not the most accurate in the world, you have to compensate by improving your skills. So it forced me to have the best grip, the best stance, the best fundamentals the best shooting technique I could. But even though I got to a point where I was very comfortable being on my own at the range and practicing and getting good results for what I wanted to achieve, it is nothing compared to competitions. Before taking part in competitions, so I've practiced on my own for maybe a whole year, weekly, and I've fired something like 2,500 rounds. But on the first competition day, the very first match I took part in, I felt like I knew nothing. Because fair enough, you have your fundamentals of marksmanship, which you need to absolutely master before you enter competitions. But the big thing with competitions is the time constraint, and it throws everything out of the window. Because not only you need to be very stable when you're shooting, let's say, from a standing position, sitting or kneeling, but the thing is, you have to get in position fast. You have to have your sights on target fast. Not mentioning that every stage has a particular course of fire that you need to memorize and remember without any faults, and nothing really prepares you to it, apart from being there on the day and going through all the steps by yourself. Because besides the time constraint, what's really challenging, what I found really challenging, is the adrenaline, the anxiety that you feel before each stage. I still remember very vividly my very first match because of all the things that went wrong. I remember I had a malfunction. Then later on, I cross-shot, so I shot at someone else's target instead of mine. I forgot then the course of fire. I ran out of time, ran out of bullets. I was very lucky. I didn't get disqualified, I guess. But as people say in the circuit, it's just a matter of time. Everyone has to go through this at least once in their life. You have to control your anxiety levels, all this adrenaline that flows in your blood, and just focus on doing the things the right way. And if you are able to reach that stage, that's a huge progress, because as people say, 50% of the job is done in the mind. So it forces you to work on these things for you to improve, because every match, at every single match, you will find something, or you think, oh yeah, I could have improved that, I could have done this better. And then you have to go back home, work with dry firing, go back to the range, and eventually test this at your next match. Just even entering the competition, being there on the day of the match, is a huge achievement, it's a huge success, because how many people around us who also practice shooting have actually taken part in a competition? But one thing, for example, I try is, once I've reached a certain level, is to make things more difficult for myself. For PRS, Precision Rifle Series, where people usually use a sandbag to stabilize the rifle on the barricades or whatever obstacle. And once, I decided, what if I just put on gloves and test it by myself without a sandbag? Of course, it was much quicker, because I just have to put my hand, put the rifle, aim and shoot. But at the same time, it's a bit more challenging because it activates another set of muscles, and you have to pay attention to other elements, and it's a very different way of holding your rifle. Or, for example, instead of a scope for CSR, what if I use a red dot? You set challenges for yourself, and I think this is what makes competitions enjoyable. You're basically testing your limits. You push yourself, like, how far can I go with this setting or another? And with time, you also realize that you don't have to invest in very expensive gear to enjoy competitions. I guess there's always a stage where we are wanting to chase the scores and score the maximum and see what kind of setup with our rifles can help us achieve that. Even the best rifles and the best equipment, the best gear, they all have their limitations, and which are ultimately due to the law of physics. There's always a limit we can either chase or play within the limit with different setups and set very different and specific challenges for ourselves. But yeah, that's one approach among many others. I hope this video was useful. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, stay safe out there.